Now, I don't often do out-and-out unboxing videos, but I was directed to the Hasbro UK eBay store by, I think it was someone on Twitter mentioned it. And I said to the person on Twitter that this could be dangerous because they were doing a lot of really good half-price offers, which might still be on at the time when you see this. It's always possible. And there was one figure there that I couldn't quite resist getting, or not getting, as the case may be. So, without further ado, let me show you who I picked up. In fact, I guess in theory, it's a couple of someones. Now then, this is character old and new, Ravage. And this is the War for Cybertron trilogy Ravage, Covert Agent Ravage, Decepticon Forever Ravage. Now, I immediately recognised him because there was a time when Transformers had gone a bit quiet, and in that time, after Generation 1 and Generation 2 in fact, after that there came along the Beast Wars. And as we know, as you probably know anyway, there is a Beast Wars film coming, which may or may not be directly related to the cartoon, the CGI cartoon of the same type. The CGI cartoon, I believe, was done by Mainframe, who also did Reboot. But it was written by Simon Furman, and as such, it was done very, very cleverly. And at one point, what happened was that it's difficult to do this without spoiling it if you haven't seen it, but suffice to say that this guy, who is Ravage, turns up in the series as a remodeled form of his G1 self. So this is G1 Ravage, but his body had been completely reformatted into this bot form. But what made me get this was this, because they very, very, very cleverly included the original style of Ravage as a cassette tape in with this modern version of Ravage from Beast Wars. And that's epic, and I remember these very, very clearly being cassette Ravage's missile launches to go onto either side of his Panther body. And that was the other thing that really made Ravage quite interesting to me as a Transformer, because although he transformed into a robotic form, his robotic form wasn't a humanoid robotic form. He transformed into a Black Panther in robotic form. So Ravage was ahead of his time, because Ravage was already a Beast Wars style Transformer before they'd even thought of Beast Wars. So fair dues to him. He was very, very ahead of his time, and he was sort of always completely. That's an interesting transformation graphic on the back there, because I'm not sure that's how it worked. I'm not sure this one actually transformed into a cassette, did it? I don't know. Somebody will tell me in the comments immediately if I'm wrong about that, but I'm not sure if that's right. But anyway, if it did, then that was an extra especially clever thing for them to have him do. And I am half tempted to keep this sealed in the box, I must admit, but by the same token, as I say, I don't often do unboxing videos, so as I weakened and succumbed and bought this one, I thought I would get him out, because yeah, he had a lot of screen time. Maybe not so much in the cartoons, but in the comics, Ravage was often seen with Megatron as a bit of a sort of a confidant, as well as being one of Soundwave's cassettes, of course. So as a result, he was very much in the mix of quite a lot of stuff that went on, and I'll demonstrate that to you because I've just picked up this this collected comic, which I haven't even unpacked and looked at yet. But you can see here he's on the front cover of this comic, and I think he was actually hunting Starscream, or Starscream was hunting him. So he was very much in the midst of it, probably more so than Frenzy and Rumble perhaps even were. But he always had a very clear characterization in the comics which I appreciated. That's interesting, actually. Even the packaging's got a little slot for his cassette tape there. So I bet you're supposed to display him on that. I think that's why it's come out as one piece quite so nicely as that. So that's very clever. This ship, by the way, is the ship that he had in Beast Wars. This is what he arrived on the planet in. So he had his own sort of scout vessel, which could cloak as well, because he was always depicted as being a very sort of stealthy operative. Hence the covert agent based on his name. So we've got a nice pull out here for his. I'm not even going to try and transform him on camera because that will just be embarrassing. I mean, that does look more straightforward than a lot of the modern ones. But modern Transformers do just disturb me with the sheer number of panels and so on that you have to deal with. And it's probably just a sign of my age, but I wouldn't want to try and mess with it. I can probably do the cassette version, hopefully. But let's have a look at this. So we've got a little quality guarantee thing there. Let's get this. Let's deal with the cassette first, shall we? Because given how much I'm blathering on about it, we might as well have a look at this. It's funny because I've just been recording a video about the differences between retro items and sort of vintage items, and this is G1 vintage Ravage. This is why they bothered to do this at all, I think. And it is sort of, and it did make me buy it. So mission accomplished on that one, Hasbro. I'm just debating whether or not I can actually safely get into this without a pair of scissors. I'm just going to go and sort that out. Right, one short jump cut later. Here's Ravage in teeny tiny cassette form, and this is very much this is pretty much Bob on G1 Ravage, and this is how he transformed into a Jaguar. That's it. That's all he was. But you see, in that day, in that age, that is perfectly acceptable, and he looks largely as he does in the comics. The comics gave him a little bit more range of movement, so did the cartoons ultimately. But originally, they did portray him fairly much as his sort of original cassette form, and it's just a really, really clever idea, and it meant that he integrated really well with Soundwave as well, because you could just. I mean, you couldn't do what they did in the series and have sort of multiple cassettes coming out of Soundwave's chest. That never happened originally. Not with the toys, what I mean, because you couldn't fit more than one cassette in. But you could fit a cassette in, so you could carry two toys around with you at the same time, both of which could transform. So fair dues to them. Interestingly, they haven't reproduced. I can't remember whether or not they put Japan on there. I don't know if the original Ravage had one of the sort of the rub icons where you could reveal his Decepticon insignia. There is a teeny tiny Decepticon insignia just there. See, so they have added that little tiny detail on, which is clever. So that might be the way they decided to tackle it for this. They're just giving him that rather than anything else. But yeah, it's very cool. So this, kids, is how we used to record music back in the day. These were tapes that could record 60 minutes of music on each side. So 120 minutes total. So there you go. You learned something. So that's very, very clever that they included that. Now, the other thing I'm trying to think about now is because, again, this is a classic growing up problem. Is he actually bigger than the original Ravage was? Was Ravage actually that big when he unfolded originally? I'm just looking at it and I can't quite convince myself one way or the other. Does he stand up? You can probably make him stand up just. Let's just see if we can make him stand up. Because obviously he's so narrow that it's very difficult. I guess if he get his feet completely in the same place, then he probably can stand up. He might be. There you go. So he might be better sitting. You could probably sit him on his haunches and use his tail as a prop, but he will stand up like that. So let's have a look at the Beast Wars style Ravage, and of course he's completely pinned in with plastic wires here. You think these days they'd be trying to move away from that, because I would have thought from a wastage point of view they would probably be frowning upon that these days, but apparently not so much. So let's free him up. And it was quite interesting because in the Beast Wars cartoon, Ravage wasn't actually on the side of Megatron's namesake initially, because he wasn't really acting as a Decepticon in Beast Wars. That was his old affiliation, but in effect he goes back to his old ways when he realizes that the current Megatron is actually associated with the original Megatron, sort of, obliquely at least. So there he is. So of course this is... now, I didn't have any of the... Well, no, I tell a lie. I had Waspinator for some bizarre reason. But that might... You know what? Waspinator might have been the last Transformers toy I ever bought. Back in my sort of original, vaguely childhood days. But even then, I was quite old when I bought Waspinator. But it's because I enjoyed the Beast Wars series in terms of its linkage to the comics and everything else. So, fair play to them. But I'm pretty sure this must be a cut above the kind of figure style that was coming out of that sort of time, because he's very well articulated. Interestingly, he's got... now, I think that insignia is actually a maximal insignia, which is the same as the then modern day version of the Autobots. Although I'm not actually convinced that isn't what do they call themselves? They weren't Decepticons. There was something else. Predacons. Thank you. So maybe that's a Predacon insignia that he adopted afterwards. I'm not sure, but I mean that's a very classic sort of shoulder joint there. But the quality doesn't feel too bad. The elbow joint feels a little bit wobbly. But the legs, I mean, it's all very, very plasticky. There doesn't seem to be much metal, if any, in there at all. The joints are metal, in fairness, but you can see his other legs are sort of lurking in the background there. They just fit down onto his back. So at some point in time, I might try and transform him when I'm not on camera trying to do it, because, as I say, that probably would be embarrassing. But that's pretty cool. Let's free up his guns. But it was just very, very one of those really, really clever little moments in Beast Wars, because Ravage was never a humanoid robot in the whole of G1's run. So to suddenly see him represented like this, for people like me who were very, very familiar with him from the G1 comics and that sort of era, this was a very, very different approach. So, but he was still very much himself. He was still, even though he was ostensibly not a Decepticon anymore, clearly, as soon as he was given the chance to sort of, be himself, he was himself. So he immediately affiliated himself with someone who he saw as being in line with the original Megatron's way of thinking. And that was one of his defining characteristics, was that he was unendingly loyal to the Decepticon cause. So you can't knock him for that, really. He was always true to his own colours. I'm just having real problems. Let me just jump cut you again for a moment. God, that was a right battle, that. There we go. Now he's armed. So, again, I mean, he never used to have guns when he was a Panther, but now he has quite sort of traditional looking robot blasters there. I don't know if they've got any particular flavour of weapon in terms of like a tech spec detail on that. I'll have to have a look at the box later on perhaps and figure that one out. But nice that he's dual wielding as well. So he's got he can more than hold his own in combat, because he's actually got two hand weapons, which is cool. I wonder if this tail is supposed to be that in the way. Does he stand up? He Probably would do if I messed with his feet a bit. He does feel quite plasticky. I don't know if that's normal for the sort of modern era of toys, but I could see these sort of snapping fairly easily if you weren't careful. He just doesn't seem to want to stand very well for me. Nearly. It's funny he's going backwards because both of his guns are out in front of him, that's a bit odd. Trying to get a bit closer to the camera, but if I do that, he's probably going to fall over again. So, I mean, definitely very poseable. Certainly very poseable. But it's just that his sense of balance appears to be a little bit interesting at the moment, it seems. But that's okay. So I dare say he turns into quite a decent panther himself, but he's definitely more Beast Wars orientated, being this sort of big and bulky, of course, being an actual sort of humanoid figure these days. Now I've also got the sort of weapons that the original Ravage cassette came with, and I'm assuming that they just fit on into the holes on either side as they used to, which seems to be a reasonable guess on my part. My main light just died on me, which is unfortunate. But as you can see, they were nice, and they were that shiny and chrome originally, but I think they were probably a little bit smaller in proportion to his body originally. As I say, that is one of the things I'm not quite sure about, is whether or not his proportions are quite the same as they were originally. But these were quite good fun, because I used to pretend that you could actually sort of fly around with these as, kind of use them as sort of thrusters if you needed to get away in a hurry. But I think they were primarily intended to be missiles that he could launch. So once he'd sort of launched those, that he was then out of weapons, which is a little bit unfortunate, but he was a sort of a one-shot wonder in that sense. I mean, I guess he had claws and teeth as well, but that was the extent of his ranged weaponry. And once they were fired, and that was it. But it's a very, very clever thing for them to have done, to have included both his Beast Wars form and his original G1 form in the same box. So I've got to hand it to Hasbro. That was well played. Another interesting aside, because I was looking at Zoids recently, and I went and had a look at a video that Leicester Vintage and Old Toy Shop had done recently on Tomy, and what I hadn't fully appreciated, but I noticed when I was looking at this box, of course, is that this is a Takara Tomy issue. So although it's also labelled Hasbro, I wonder who's actually producing this, as in who's actually manufacturing them. So I wonder if it is Takara Tomy who's actually manufacturing them, which is somewhat ironic, given that I was looking at Zoids the other day, and they're still producing, Tomy and Takara are now producing together plastic toys still with little metallic elements to their components. So that was quite that did make me smile slightly, as I'd only just watched that video. But it's I like that. I mean, for me personally, from a display point of view, that's really nice for me. I could find a decent sort of Ravage comic, which I may well have one actually, and sort of use that as a kind of backdrop for him. That would be quite good fun. I suppose the only other element I could try and do is find an actual G1 Ravage from somewhere. I bet they're quite hard to find with their missile components as well. But I'm equally sure there have been reproductions of him down the line before this one. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you were thinking of getting it, as I say, there was a good discount on it when I bought it. So I would keep your eyes peeled for discounts, because I think it's rare that they're available only at their retail price. So worth keeping an eye open for. I think that's it for this one before my voice goes. So I'll ask you to like and subscribe as ever, and say cheers for now.